Hi everyone, I'm Sudeshna, you know me, and today I am with my friend from about 15 years back, Orko.
More than that,
We
probably. Yeah,
More
15
than that.
years. 15, no, 15 years. 15 years is a good
My
number.
God, yes.
Yeah.
Uh,
Makes us feel old, but yeah.
yeah, and we went to college together, studying economics back in the day. Um, and now Orko's almost finishing off his PhD in something really, really interesting. I'll let Orko tell you a bit more about that.
So, yeah, I'm doing my PhD at London Business School in finance. So, I'm hopefully completing soon. And the topic is like the work that I do is related to the impact of uncertain environment on investment decisions by corporates. So how, like say, uncertainty surrounding political decision or even uncertainty surrounding the period that we are staying right now, how that affects kind of corporate financing decisions. Broadly, that would be the area that I focus on. So the times are kind of interesting in the context of what I do. So yeah, not that
Yeah,
I would want one such event to happen in terms of my just to help me understand in terms of my research, but as economists, we always look forward to such events. Yeah,
yeah, that's exactly right. And
yeah,
whatever we are talking about right now, like honestly, Orko, your thesis is just going to add so much color to the discussions here. And I guess what I wanted to really do is get in a perspective from economists who are trained in the subject rather than
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
people who basically, well, and it's obvious that our economy is kind of belongs to all of us, not only for
Yeah,
us
sure,
economists to
sure,
talk
sure.
about, but what I did want to do is for us to have that informed, slightly nuanced discussion
The
around
situation
this.
now, I think even for the economists, it's kind of a new situation because nobody has seen anything like that before. And given we are such species which have both hands, right, on the one hand and then on the other hand, so it's very difficult to get a direct answer from any economist. And you would know that given your past experience with economists and studying economics in general, it's
Yeah,
hardly you would get a direct answer
yeah.
from us.
If you have two economists in the room, you have at least three opinions, right?
Yeah, at least. Yeah, yeah. Sure. No, it's an interesting time, just like to put it very lightly.
Yeah.
And we have never seen this time before. So everybody has their own view about how the economy is going to shape. But I
Mm,
think I think the fundamental thing that everybody is caring about, or the first fundamental thing that people are interesting in knowing or people are concerned about is what is happening to the healthcare investments or healthcare costs, like whether the healthcare system is equipped enough to handle such pressures coming from like the increased this strike of this novel virus, as they are saying. And that is why we have always heard about flattening the curve. I don't know whether it's a very well understood concept why people talk about flattening the curve, but actually that is one of the most important things that people are or most policymakers are trying to push forward is to flatten the curve. And that means that NHS for UK and like any healthcare system across the world has a limited capacity to handle patients. And just think of the fact that if on an average a million of people are going to get affected, you don't want the 1 million people to get affected at one time. You don't
exactly.
want all the 1 million people to go to the hospital at the same point in time, because then it wouldn't be possible for them to handle it. And imagine if at one point 1 million people go, then the curve becomes very steep, that at that particular point in time you want that 1 million people are going to the hospitals and they do not have that capacity. So
Yeah.
what people are saying is that this if this 1 million people can be distributed over the time, and we know that 1 million people are going to get affected, and 1 million people, take it with a pinch of salt. I don't know the numbers, and this is just
Mm.
like a
Yeah.
number that I'm just telling, because now I think it's roughly how many 400,000 people are already affected or
Affected.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so that is the thing, that people want this people to get affected slowly, so that the pressure on NHS or any other health system
Yeah.
goes down. Because say in Italy, as of I think very recently, 49% of the ventilators are being used only for these coronavirus issues. And
Yeah.
think of all the other cases that are going to come by
Exactly.
that time. So it will spill over.
Exactly.
If all the cases are related to coronavirus or this COVID-19 that comes to the healthcare system, then nobody's going to, it will spill over to all the other diseases. It will be a mayhem. So
Yeah.
I think that is what I always found, is whether it's a very well-known concept when people say, like I see in Facebook posts, everybody talking about flatten the curve.
Yeah.
But if I would be kind of somebody who does nothing to do with any kind of curve, it would be
Mm.
difficult for me to understand what does it mean to
Yeah.
flatten a curve.
Yeah.
Uh,
And the
yeah,
the logarithmic scale that it takes, I don't want to
yeah,
go into too much detail about
yeah,
that,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah,
just the slope of the curve, right?
yeah. But this I think this is like the curve of increasing number of cases.
Yeah.
So you would think of it to take like a normal curve or like a more steeper distribution curve. You want it to be a flattened, so it rises and then flattens out. That is what
Yeah.
any kind of disease would look like, any kind of epidemic would look like, that it
Yes.
kind of peaks up at some point and then it
Yeah.
fades out. Like probably at some point it should definitely go. Like many of the forecasts tell that it will probably fade out around August, September.
Yeah.
Now the thing is that what would be the shape of the fading out from now till August?
Yeah.
Whether
So
every yeah
so if we just talk about that for a bit, what
yeah
happens if the curve was not to be flattened? What if we see a steep rise in the curve? What
like
happens then?
if you see the steepest rise in the curve, then how like imagine there are say X number of beds in any hospital. Now
Yeah.
say there are, for argument's sake, say there are 2 million overall beds in an hospital with like probably a million ventilators. I'm just giving you numbers,
Yeah, a million
very random
ventilators
numbers. Yeah,
is
a million
probably
ventilators are
way
not
too
there. It's
much,
like
but yeah.
exactly like I'm talking about say the entire world.
Yeah, okay.
But now if all these 2 millions get affected at one point in time, they go to the hospital, there's not enough bed for them, there's not
Hmm.
enough health workers working for them.
Hmm.
And these 2 million are just for one particular disease. And just the rise in this virus, or just the rise in COVID-19, doesn't mean that all the other diseases are going to go down,
Exactly.
doesn't mean that cancer has been resolved, doesn't mean that
Yeah.
people are not having heart attacks, it doesn't mean that all the other viruses or all the other million different viruses that exist, all the other influenzas that already are known has
Yeah.
been solved in the world.
Or someone
So
just doesn't have a car accident.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So these cases are already there, and now over that you're putting in a bunch of these 2 million people at one go in the hospital.
Yeah.
So there's not enough capacity in the hospitals to handle them. However, if these 2 millions were distributed over a period of time, say
Yeah.
today there is 20,000 people who goes, and then over a period of say 100 days, this 2 million people who will be sick at some point in time goes to the hospital, then somebody else who would be by that time better get released, and there's enough space, because the person who goes today is not going to stay 100 days in the hospital. So there will be enough capacity to have all of them get treated properly
Yeah.
without making the healthcare system completely bankrupt. I
Absolutely.
think that is what the fundamental thing is. Otherwise, if you think about it, the numbers are not that vast in terms of just like talk of any death is very painful.
Mm,
But if somebody tells me today 500 people died,
mm.
what does that mean? Unless and until you tell me
Context.
that how many people do die every day, I don't know. So just the number that 500 people died today doesn't mean much to me.
Yeah.
Unless and until somebody is saying that 500 people suddenly additional capacity has to go in the hospital, or
Yeah.
there this number will rise every day.
Yeah.
So that is the bigger issue I think that the governments are facing.
Yeah.
That at one point everybody, if they get sick and the hospital has to accommodate them, it should be spread over a certain period in time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, in terms of the healthcare system coping,
Mhm.
then we are also reading a lot of, I guess, news and research coming out that says that this could take up to 12 to 18 months to actually get a handle on.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
See, these are like, I do not have a particular understanding on drug, like making medicines or making vaccinations, but yeah, like there are to get a vaccine, I think 12 to 18 months is what like people are saying, proper epidemiologists and so on.
Mm,
But I think what, at least for me also, it's news that I'm reading, so I don't have a particular understanding on that. But there are other tests detecting them is also coming by, like some antibody tests that I was reading about. Even if that come by before and you can detect people and can identify and separate them, that
mm,
would be much better. Now the problem is you can't detect anybody, and so
mm,
you have to pool everybody and lock down everybody in
mm.
order to protect the economy as a whole, because you are not being able to test as many people as you would want them to. And
Yeah.
when you don't know who the person is affected, the only way that you can prevent a disease from spreading is by putting everybody back in their home. And what
Exactly.
that means is even the daily wage earner are back in their home. There's no income for them. But if you would
Exactly.
be able to identify or test more about who the person is,
Mm,
which pocket they are going to stay, and isolate them, then you don't need to lock down an entire society. You can have more tests. For example, now if I have a very casual cold and cough, or probably the season is changing, I can have a running nose. Everybody must have running nose for multiple other different reasons than this
COVID 19.
COVID-19.
Mm,
But now, if I have it, I have to stay back in my home, right? Because I'm not able to get tested. So
yeah.
anybody that has these symptoms are under the purview, or people are more skeptical that they might spread it. But if we can test it and get the people tested and say that, okay, of this 500 people that got tested, only two people have are affected by this disease, and these two people should stay back at home and not the entire 500 people.
Yeah.
So
And
that
no wonder who
yeah,
is there for saying just test, test, test.
yeah, exactly. And that is the
Yeah.
point, that ideally you would want to test maximum number of people so that you can identify the pocket, because this
Mm,
lockdown is hugely costly. Probably we don't feel it. We social distancing is a privilege that we have. Not too many people have this privilege.
yeah.
And while we complain for staying in a house, and it's very fair enough to complain. Everybody has their own problem. I'm not glamorizing somebody else's problem and saying that that problem is more important than the others.
Yeah.
But one has to think of some people where every day is a basic necessity, and particularly
Exactly.
from the country that we come from, like India. Like if you log the people down, you know how many people survive on the daily wages.
90% are in the
Yeah,
informal sector, right?
exactly. And everybody earns their daily income. It's not like people have savings for that are going to sustain them, or there's a company that are paying them even when they're working from. There's no work from home. There's
Yeah.
no home for that matter for many people. Where
Mm,
would they work from? So So this is hugely costly for the society
Yeah.
just to get locked down.
Yeah.
So testing would probably have some kind of effect in alleviating these things.
Yeah.
But social distancing is kind of essential, because I was just, and again, like, I'm not an expert in this virus kind of situation, but I was reading a very interesting article that about a case study of Philadelphia versus St. Louis
Mm-hmm.
of 1918 Spanish flu.
Okay.
So what happened is that in what Philadelphia did is they did not do any social distancing, and it spiked a lot number of diseases at that point in time. While St. Louis, at the same point in time when this Spanish flu was entering US, they completely cut off the people who were, because that was the time when First World War was also going on.
Hmm.
So people were coming back from war, and they were bringing the disease back,
The
because
disease
one
back,
could
right?
one could think that why was 1917, why it became such a big pandemic, because there
Hmm.
was no kind of, everybody was not going for holidays in Italy at that point
Hmm.
in time. So so but there was war going on
Yeah.
at that point in time,
Yeah.
the First World War, so people were bringing the disease back home.
Hmm.
So what St. Louis did is they kind of isolated those whom they suspected. And if you see the 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 curve, it's kind of amazingly different. Let me try and dig that article down while we are talking. I'll share that picture. It's really fascinating to me. Let's see if
Uh,
I can get
can
it.
you share your screen if you
Yeah,
get it?
if I get it, I'll share my screen. Yeah,
Okay.
sure. Yeah.
And if we can't see, we can share around the link later.
I think I just have the picture with me. So let me try and dig that down. But yeah, but we can keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. So the other thing that you mentioned that
Yeah.
not many people, I think, talk about,
Yeah.
there are two aspects to it. I guess we talk a lot about the economy.
Yeah.
And when we talk about the economy,
Yeah.
we mean, oh, okay, so the market's crashing and
Yeah.
the pound is falling, the
Yeah.
dollar's losing confidence, and so on.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then the economy also is uh, a,
About
the is also n- gonna work or not work for the daily wage laborer, and not only for the investment bankers of the
I
world.
think I think these are all related. If the investment banker doesn't make money, probably
Mm,
it doesn't help the other people as well. So I wouldn't say that these are two separate, distinct things, but these are two very similar things. And while the problem is that while we talk a lot about markets crashing, we kind of tend to ignore the fact that this can happen to other people as well. That there are more severe consequences to the daily wage earners.
yeah,
And as we were just discussing a couple of minutes back, that that each day of not working is kind of much more costly for these guys.
yeah.
So let me I think I managed to dig out the graph. Let me try and share if I can share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
But can you see the graph?
Yeah. Okay,
So
so
so this dotted line over here, if you see it, this
St.
is
Louis,
the St. Louis thing,
who had
and
done the
we had done the social
social
distancing,
distancing,
and
right?
the other graph is from Philadelphia,
Yeah,
and that's what was the difference, and why people talk about social distancing. We
yeah,
can see from historical experience as well that how things become so much different. So,
absolutely.
yeah.
And the number of, yeah, the death rate there is
Yeah, just like a
just,
spike.
yeah,
So yeah, in Philadelphia, I think it started in 17th September at this point,
mm,
and then in St. Louis from 5th of October,
Mm,
and then in Philadelphia there was no social distancing, while
mm.
in St. Louis there was some amount of social distancing, and you can see the
The
difference
difference in the
in the
death
death
rates
rate.
and
While if you see that the graph kind of flattens out, but the peak is much higher.
mm,
Yeah. So
yeah, that's right.
yeah. So yeah, we were talking. I'm just
Yeah,
stopping.
and
Yeah.
that's also interesting because say for example, if we had the situation what Italy is in now or
Yeah. Yeah.
Spain
Yeah.
as well is in now, we
Right.
are pretty much at a very sharp peak.
Sure.
And probably countries like India who, well, depends on how well they have tested, of course, but
Yeah.
seems like there's still that scope of them being able to flatten the curve
Yeah.
much
Exactly.
more than Italy has been able to till
Yeah.
date.
Italy. The social distancing started much later, and we
Exactly.
know what the consequences are. There is some kind of different demographic uh, things of Italy versus China or Italy versus South Korea. There's different, like the average age of Italian population is much higher. The interaction between the younger population and the elderly people in Italy is much higher. So
Yeah,
while because we know fairly that that the elderly population are much more vulnerable,
yeah,
and while the younger guys can be a very big career for this virus.
yeah,
So and probably in China, I'm not sure, but people say that in Italy the interaction between the elderly and the younger population is much more
yeah,
than the other places where it got affected. So probably the
yeah,
effect is much higher
yeah,
in the other places.
yeah. I've heard
Yeah,
that one too. So, Orko,
right.
what
Yeah,
would be the difference between, say, for example, a country that had a spike like Philadelphia had
yeah, yeah.
and a, a country that had more of a flat curve in terms of their economy?
So uh, firstly, the country that had a sharper spike, their healthcare system is much more in doldrums. Country has to wedge out more money for the healthcare system,
Mm,
and thereby there are more deficits that are coming by. And if we know, like, if the healthcare system is broken, then the country's backbone is broken. The
mm,
economy will take a big hit. Like, say
mm,
for example, for South Korea, like it got affected almost at the same time as Italy did. But if you see their death rate, it's much lower than that of Italy because of possible tests that they did, precautions that they took place, and now they're kind of sort of removing their precautions. So the time that the country will be suffering the consequences will be stretched much more. Once you, because the thing is that if you are hit badly at one point, you get a system which is broken.
mm,
Otherwise, if you're hit, like, it's almost like you're hitting the same thing with a small hammer, or whether you're for 10 times, or you're hitting the same thing with a sledgehammer at one go.
mm,
With the sledgehammer, it just gets broken. With the small thing, you still probably have some impact which is spread over the time, but the at least the system is not broken. So the
yeah.
economy will still be able to survive once this impact is done away with, or if the curve is flattened, because the healthcare system is still surviving.
Mm,
But if the healthcare system kind of collapses, then the economy itself takes a big hit. It's difficult to quantify that what would be the number. Several
mm,
different studies say, like, World Bank says that there is a chance of we getting into a global recession.
mm.
And when we think of global recession, you have to think of that the global GDP is going to go to negative, like the GDP
Right.
growth, not
GDP
GDP.
growth, yeah.
But think of then that, like India, China, such big economies which typically grow at the rate of
Mm,
6%, 7%, 8% on average.
mm.
even they have to suffer that much for the global economic growth to have a negative hit.
Yeah.
I don't know what the global growth, or I don't remember at the back of my hand what the global growth was during recessions.
Mm.
But many people say that this could end up being a shock which has a stronger effect than recession. Because
Yeah.
at least in recession, people were not restricted. Like some sectors are getting completely wiped off. Think of
Mm.
think of entertainment sector. Think of people going to watch movies.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to watch movies now, right?
Yeah.
Think of the mom and pop stores where people go to have like a small dinner.
Yeah.
They employ a lot of people. They're going to
Mm.
go completely bankrupt, and they are not the kind of people who has a proper payroll for their employees, who kind of they give them gratuities or provident funds, or have these are
Yeah.
kind of informal sectors.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much governments providing funding would go for these stores to sustain this period.
Yeah.
One thing is that when the economy is again back, the economy or this virus thing has gone away, then the economy again comes back. But think of the time period from now till the economy recovering. The problem is which are the firms that will survive this period. It's
Yeah.
only if they survive this period that they can recover once
Exactly.
the shock has gone by, right? Like
Exactly.
that is why government is providing some kind of
Uh,
uh,
yeah.
like the stimulus packages,
Yeah. The UK
which I
government
think,
has been, yeah.
yeah, I think in US Senate also they have passed a
Okay.
$2 trillion thing to help their firms.
Yeah.
But at this point in time, think of the smaller stores. How would
Mm.
they survive?
Yeah.
So it's in those informal sectors. I think it will be more difficult for them to sustain.
Yeah.
But I think the recovery, in my limited knowledge, I think the recovery should be faster for this particular shock than the recession, like the financial crisis.
Yeah.
Because over here, think of now, if somebody tells that there's nothing, everything has been resolved,
Mm.
and one is still under the payrolls and things are firm has provided the stimulus, then the economy coming back and the pent up demand coming into play wouldn't take that much of time to be in action. But think of the time that we were in recessions or the financial crisis. There was no money, right?
Mm.
Like everything was, the underlying itself was very volatile, or
Mm.
underlying itself was not in a good shape.
Yeah.
Because at that point in time, all the money that people would have spent in the future were sucked out by all these big banks,
Mm.
or through their unscrupulous way of dealing prior to the crisis. So these money from the future was
Mm.
transferred to the prior period, and there was no money left for the economy. But
Yeah.
now I think that's not typically the case, though.
Yeah.
If the firm doesn't sustain this period or till the period that the pent up demand comes back, then it would be a problem. And also, this shock has nothing to do with the firms itself, right? The firms didn't give rise to the shock.
Yeah.
During the financial crisis, it was some kind of unscrupulous behavior of the big firms that caused the shock in some
Yeah.
way. But now it's completely exogenous,
Yeah.
nothing to do with firms. So
We
it's
still
a
have
good
a
firm,
strong.
and you don't, as an economy, you wouldn't want your good firm to go burst just because of some bad luck. That is the last thing that you would want. You would probably would want your unproductive bad firms such shock. If it can wipe away all the bad firms and transfer the resource to the best firms, that would be a right form of allocation.
That's really interesting that you
Yeah,
mentioned that, because
yeah.
I actually have been thinking,
Mm.
say, well, we don't really know how long this is going to last for, but
Mhm.
say it lasts for the next 12 months till we have a vaccine, and till
Mhm.
then,
Yeah,
in we don't have enough test kits and we
yeah,
are all working from home.
yeah.
So 12 months down the line, all of our work suddenly starts looking really different. I could be doing the same work that I'm doing sitting in London,
Yeah.
sitting in a beach in Bali, or
Yeah.
back
Yeah.
home in India.
Yeah.
And what do you think could be the second or the third degree effects on
See, if
currencies in this scenario then?
it's very very difficult to say what would be the effect on currency, because if you think of currencies are always in pairs, right? Then you have to
Mm,
have a view on which exactly are those countries which will do best, which are the countries which will do worse, where the funds will flow. So I don't know. I have a particular view on the currencies of what exactly will happen, but one could think of that, given the performance that Asian countries did,
mm,
probably if now the probability of another shock goes up, then probably there could be more investment towards the the Asian countries which perform better. But that's a very naive way of saying it. So it's I wouldn't take a prediction at the currencies,
mm,
because it is not a very easy thing to model what kind of effect
mm,
will have on the currencies. But if I have to take a guess on any kind of asset classes,
mm,
I would think of some stocks, right? Like say the online platforms, or just the structure of the economy. If you see Zoom's stock,
yeah,
the one that we are talking on now, if
yeah,
you just see the trend from mid February to now, I'll just try to dig in Zooms. And again, the disclaimer is I'm not giving any investment advice.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. No, we do not give investment advice. For
So
that, people
yeah,
should consider a financial advisor.
yeah, certainly. But and I hope people are not naive enough to look at like to random people talking and investing on what they're saying. Yeah, but you never know.
Well,
Yeah, yeah. So let me just show you the chart for Zoom. Can you see my screen?
yes.
Yeah. You see, if I do,
Yeah,
yeah,
look at that.
probably it's around this time that the virus started from
Yeah,
here, and then you
it's just
see
been
the
going up, up, and
kind of
up.
yeah.
So
So
this
these
is
are these are
probably not the time to buy the Zoom stock, or is it? I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah, this is a difficult thing to say, because if you look at the cryptocurrency, it went up and up. So all the teaching in business schools are shifting to Zoom and everything. So those like broadly what we were talking about is if there is some kind of structural shift that one would affect, think of in the
Yeah,
behavior of how things are, right? Broadly, if I have to think of what we were talking.
yeah,
So I would think if one gets too comfortable in working from home, and if
yeah.
people find that this is not that unproductive,
Hmm.
then it saves a lot of money, right? For the companies not to rent those big buildings and
Yeah,
give a little bit of extra salary to individuals and ask them to take a bigger apartment where they can work on their own.
yeah,
I feel that's a decent thing that could come about later. Like obviously there will be some kind of work that has to be, but imagine like I think one of the highest overhead costs for a company would be the rent of
hmm,
the buildings that the firms are doing and the per square feet expenditure that is allotted to each individual.
hmm.
But if you can work from home, your salary goes up, you don't have to travel, you can sit
Yeah,
and work. Now yeah, like we are all social animals, we have to interact with people.
yeah,
But I don't know, like, do you have to be sit beside another person? Like you and me are talking, we're fine.
yeah, yeah,
So
exactly. That's
yeah, and
it.
you have much more time. You go for a walk, you go for a run, do it your own time.
Yeah,
But I think just like having worked, like for me, I'm still a student per se, so I do not have a particular time of working. But for people who are used to a certain time of working, say working from 9 to 7 or something.
Well, but you were working for this bank before, right?
Yeah. So
So,
so I'm saying that, but that has been quite some time.
okay, fair
So I'm
enough.
just saying that, yeah, for me as well, for my past myself and other people who are working now. So think of the flip side that I see is that earlier people were working from say 9 to 7, and after 7
Mm,
they're out from their workspace.
yeah.
Now there is no distinction between workspace and
Mm,
home. Your home
yeah.
become workspace, your workspace becomes home. So
Yeah.
you don't know what point in time you're exactly out of your work. You have
Yeah.
to you have to condition your mind to say that after this point in time I'm not working. So I don't know whether this is good or bad. Probably from the firm's point of view it's good. From individual's point of view you might want to bit compartmentalize your mind as to say that this is my work, this is my life.
Yeah, no, I know. Like, I was
Yeah,
actually talking about structure and boundary,
yeah,
I think just a couple of days before on a blog or with someone. For like personally, for my
yeah,
manager, he would say,
yeah,
"Well, you save two
yeah,
hours of commute time. You give
yeah,
that
yeah,
into work." But hey,
yeah,
I also
yeah.
do 2 hours of reading during my commute.
Exactly,
So
exactly. And people do so many things, or you chose to do 2 hours commute for some reason.
yeah.
And yeah, that's the problem. I don't know whether to call it a flip side or a positive or what,
Mm,
but those are the things that I think will be different.
yeah.
And say if like talking to people through these mediums becomes more easy, if teaching through these mediums become more convenient, if meetings becomes more convenient, then probably this could be a new normal.
Yeah.
I don't know. These are like a probably like a an episode directly out of Black Mirror, but but you need like a big shock for certain kind of minimum
Structural
probabilistic
changes.
event to happen
Yeah.
so that this kind of structural change takes place.
Yeah.
And a complete lockdown of world is certainly one of those rarest of the rare events that could happen in the lifetime of probably one generation.
Yeah.
I don't know, like it is the first time in my generation, is the first time in my parents' generation, is the
Mm,
first time in my grandparents' generation.
yeah.
So nobody has seen such drastic measures by the
Mm,
global community
yeah.
anytime before. So
And tell
it's,
me
it's an
how is this different from the last 2008 crisis? This is very different to the
yeah.
2008 crisis. Tell me why.
I think so. We we kind of knew there was a lot of uncertainty in terms of policy, but we
Hmm.
kind of knew what went wrong.
Hmm.
Now we do not have a clear understanding of what is going on with us.
Yeah.
And as we were discussing, like in the financial crisis, you know that it originated from the firms.
Hmm.
There was some kind of behavior of the firms during the the early part of that decade, and their behavior that caused the crisis. And
Hmm.
thereby, like obviously, like the ramifications would be same, the loss of jobs, everything would be the same. But this is some a very blind spot for the global economy. Nobody
Hmm.
knows what they're facing by. So in that sense, it's a more difficult thing. But at
Yeah.
least in that time, like there was not in people were losing job. The shock was just economic
Yeah.
shock. Now
Yeah.
you can very well perceive these shocks. Say, for
Yeah.
example, an unorganized homemaker
Yeah.
can very well realize this shock. The only way that he or she could realize that shock in the financial crisis because there's less money in their home now.
Yeah.
Now, even if they have enough money, still he or she, if they are the homemakers, they can understand this that there is a palpable thing that is happening.
Yeah. And just thinking back to 2008, I mean, we
Yeah,
both were
yeah,
studying back then,
yeah,
but in some sense, there was a sense of safety of being not as exposed to the financial crisis in
Yeah,
20,
so there were
2008 in
some.
India, but this
There were
one's
some
just
in,
wiping the
yeah, in
world.
India certainly that you knew that these are the kind of policies that could be taken, or some
Mm,
economies that were now you're
like
kind
what
of
policy works?
yeah, like if there's an asteroid strikes, what would you do?
Yeah.
And
I mean,
I
this is
was
even worse than an asteroid because an
yeah,
asteroid would strike one country or
yeah,
one
or
city.
if it's a big
Uh,
asteroid strikes and
okay.
everything
Okay.
goes, yeah.
Yeah.
So I was seeing this episode in Netflix's Pandemic.
Hmm.
So there is one episode on this. So these are something called Something Explained, the series' name, and one
Right.
of that
Okay.
episode is Pandemic, and somebody over there was saying that there is only some certainties in life. One is life, death, taxes, and pandemic.
Right.
So, so people knew this is going to happen, but nobody knew it would happen to them
Yeah.
till it happens to them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's different. It's a new thing that nobody knows how to handle it.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, I was reading this article by a virologist, I think.
Mm.
That's what they are called. I never
Yeah,
even knew such a
yeah,
profession existed.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah, so I was reading this article, and he actually walks you through why we should have always expected a viral epidemic and
yeah.
why they had been talking about it for quite some time. But
Right.
obviously,
Yeah.
we never think about the enemy that we can't see in a way.
Sure. Yeah. Exactly. Like, and in some sense, I can understand that. Like, think of politician who
Yeah,
has 5 years to get re-elected.
yeah.
What is the objective function of politician? Is to give a signal to the people that they are voting for,
Mm.
such that they can come back to power. This is the
Yeah,
simple
not
thing that
to do better to the people. They
if
may
if
or may
if
not. It
if
depends. It
I feel that
depends.
it
But
completely depends on the people and what better means to them.
true.
Every I think if you have to just put it in bare body, the politician's objective function is to get re-elected.
Yes.
And how would they get re-elected? They would send some signals
Mm.
to the people that I'm talking about democracy, obviously.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like they will send some signals to the people through the work that they've done, and ask people to give them votes.
Yeah.
If a government today tells them that the entire money that I have had, or a significant proportion of money that I have had, I've put it in a safety net, such that when once in a generation even comes by, it will save you. Do you think
Mm.
that political party is going to get re-elected? I
True.
don't know. Rather, if somebody puts that money and tells that I'm even if they do some very good work with that, say they put it in infrastructure, even if they kind of invest in cleaner energy, that
Yeah.
is also very less likely that people vote on the basis of cleaner energy. But still, that could be a palpable thing because people are talking about it.
Mm.
So I completely understand that it's unlikely that a politician would spend enough resources
Mm.
to have something developed for an unforeseen, limited like a very, very rare event to
Yeah.
happen.
And I
It's
guess
not how.
we are only realizing
Yeah,
today that in the UK at least, the NHS and the
yeah,
BBC were such great ideas. Like
yeah,
most of the time, well, it, people in UK love the NHS
yeah,
always, but
right.
we always kind of moan about, oh,
Hmm.
the national tax and the
Yeah,
insurance
yeah.
that we pay and so on. But
Exactly. So, but again, like because we saw it in our lifetime and we did see that this event had happened, then we kind of retrospectively tell that, okay, it was a good idea.
yeah,
But if this wouldn't have happened, and imagine
yeah,
all this money would have spent over here to build
yeah,
that one vaccine,
yeah,
then yeah, like people will still criticize, right?
yeah.
So I don't see how. a politician can be incentivized to invest in such places where the returns is very, very long term, or the
Yeah.
returns is very, very, it comes in a scenario which is very, very less probable,
Yeah.
or the possibility of such an event is happening is completely like a tail event.
Yes.
So yeah, I wouldn't blame politicians. In fact, I do not blame politicians at all for much of what
Yeah.
they do, because it's they only do what they get them re-elected. And it's what we as the common people vote on will
Yeah.
make them do what they do. I'm not talking about political capture or those kind of things.
Hmm.
Those are definitely something that you would completely tell not to do. Obviously, they're wrong thing, but like just
Explain a
politicians,
bit about political capture, sorry.
these are things like, you hack uh, EVMs, what they
I
talk
see.
about in
Okay.
India, or
Yeah, yeah,
you kind of like do what they did with Cambridge Analytica kind of
yeah.
things, or you kind of have so much money that you're giving money to the local elites to tell the people under them to vote in favor of
Yeah.
these particular political parties. These are like illegal in some ways.
Hmm.
So these are the things that, but other than that, say in the context of India, if there's too much emphasis on religion,
Hmm.
I don't blame the political party for it.
Hmm.
You would want them to not do it, but why would they not do it if that is what
That's
gets
what
them
gets them
re-elected?
reelected, right?
Yeah. So one has to think of where does the problem arises.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's who we deserve. We get the leader who we deserve, I
Yeah.
think. Yeah. And that's true for the world economy. Like, do you think like all the leaders, global leaders whom we criticize, are we as a society, can we say that we are better than the leaders that we have as a society?
Hmm.
I don't think so.
Definitely
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
your leaders are a reflection of your society, and
exactly. And leaders would never do something that they don't think would get them, unless and until they're like really, really stupid. Of what examples we have enough in our country. Like our country means like our home country, India.
yeah.
But other than that, if like there's a smart politician, they would definitely not do something that wouldn't get them
Well, we have
elected.
smart politicians in India as well, and I think
Yeah,
our current PM, the
yeah,
current Indian PM,
yeah.
he is a smart guy. I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly. No, that is what I'm saying. Like he's a smart,
yeah,
smart guy, and that is the thing. Like and people listen to him.
yeah,
And like you saw, like this Janta curfew. What
yeah,
apart from like this like random events
yeah,
of some group of people praying to the Lord Corona to save them from troubles. Other than that, it was broadly like people just obeyed him and stayed.
yes, he's a
That just
very good
yeah.
crisis PM for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. I just hope that given that so many people listens to him, he
Hmm.
comes and speak in other situations as well.
Yeah,
Because how long will it take? Like how much time will it need for him to just come and talk for like 5 minutes? Just to because people look up at him.
yeah,
And that they do, that they indeed do. And in
yeah,
time of crisis, if he just comes and say that, it's going to be all right, just don't do this, probably there'll be a significant group of people who will
yeah,
listen to him.
yeah.
So yeah, but there might be some reason why he doesn't do it, and it's not very wise for him to always come and speak in every matter. Then probably it reduces the weight of the time
True,
that he comes and speaks. So,
true.
I do not trivialize the actions that they do. So
Hmm.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But yeah, we all are in kind of time that nobody, neither us nor the leaders, anybody have seen it before.
Before, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
and
But
that's what it
and
is. It's
and
it's not a rehearsal.
actually, if you think of it, the Asian countries which handled the situation better, they had seen it during the time of SARS in 2003.
That's
And if you
right.
think about it, they are the ones who managed the crisis much better because they had the crisis in their memory. They
Yeah,
knew what had happened. They knew how to. that these are a shock that can really, really cripple your economy, and then they took the necessary steps. So now imagine like there's a crisis 20 years down the line. You know what to do, right?
Mm,
You would know.
yeah.
So that is what happened in the other Asian economies.
Yeah.
So there's a documentary. I think yeah, I mentioned it right, like the pandemic one. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that's a good thing to see. It was shot in I think 2016 or 17, and then they were talking about these kind of pandemic situations that can come by, and it's in the cards.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's yeah.
Okay. Brilliant. So
Yeah. No,
that's
it's
that's a bit of insight, I think, on
yeah.
the economy and
Yeah.
politics, and it's really interesting.
It's just like a random discussion that we used to have for hours when we were like 15
Yeah.
years back. I wouldn't say how old I was then.
Because that'll
Yeah. But yeah, if 15 years back I was in my undergrad, so one could figure out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My God. But hopefully, in the next 15 years, we'll be in very, very different places and talking about
Yeah.
much
Yeah,
funner
probably we'll talk
things
about.
than
Yeah,
an
exactly.
epidemic.
Sure. Hopefully.
Yeah,
Hopefully we all live after
to
this
tell the tale.
to tell the
Yes.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Good.
brilliant.
Sure, like yeah.
Okay,
It's
okay.
amazing. Yeah. Good talking to you after a
Yeah,
couple of
brilliant
days. Yeah,
talking to you.
sure.
I will stop. Okay, Arko.
Huh.
I'll see you when I see you,
Yeah.
and all the best with your defense.
Recording চলছে না